Every decade has records that arrive slightly out of order. Sounds and machines the rest of the world hadn't caught up with yet. Some were laughed at, some were ignored, and a few quietly rearranged everything that came after them. So today, we're counting down 20 songs from the 1970s that were too advanced for their time. Number 20, Iron Man by Black Sabbath. The sound that defined an entire genre started with an industrial accident. Tony Iommi lost the tips of 2 fingers on his right hand in a sheet metal factory in Birmingham on his last day of work, before the band had gone anywhere. He made himself replacement fingertips out of a melted plastic bottle, covered them in leather, and, because he could barely feel the strings, began tuning his guitar down to slacken the tension. That downward tuning produced the thick, sludgy weight running through Iron Man. From the 1970 album Paranoid, critics at the time had almost nothing kind to say. Rolling Stone's review of the band's debut was famously dismissive, and plenty of writers filed Sabbath under gimmick. The audience disagreed. Paranoid went to number 1 in Britain and sold in enormous numbers in America, and within a decade, every heavy metal band on Earth was working from the template Iommi built by accident with a plastic bottle and a bandaged hand. Number 19, What's Going On by Marvin Gaye. Berry Gordy did not want this record released. Motown's founder reportedly called it the worst thing he had ever heard, and told Gaye that protest material and jazz chords had no business on a Motown single. Gaye refused to record anything else until the label gave in. It was released in January 1971, largely pushed through by executives working around Gordy, and went to number 2 on the pop chart and number 1 on the R&B chart. The song didn't come from Gaye alone. Ronaldo Obi Benson of the Four Tops had watched police break up a demonstration in Berkeley and started writing about it with Al Cleveland. The Four Tops turned it down, and Gaye reshaped it.
What's going on? What's going on? Hey, what's going on? What's going on?
Gaye then did something even less expected. Rather than treat it as a one-off single, he built an entire album around it, with the songs flowing into one another as a single continuous statement, a format Motown had never released, and one that changed what a soul album was allowed to be. Almost everything about the finished record broke the rules. The conversational party chatter opening it, the loose, jazz-inflected playing from the Funk Brothers, and Gaye's 2 lead vocals stacked on top of each other. A happy accident from the mixing desk that he liked enough to keep.
What's going on? What's going on? What's going on?
Number 18, Baba O'Reilly by The Who. Long before anybody used the word sequencer in casual conversation, that pulsing keyboard pattern was coming out of the speakers. Pete Townshend built it on a Lowrey organ, using the instrument's repeat function to generate a shimmering, mechanical figure that runs almost the entire length of the song without a human hand keeping it going. The title is a tribute to 2 people who never met, the spiritual teacher Meher Baba and the American minimalist composer Terry Riley, whose repetitive keyboard works Townshend had been studying closely. Stranger still is where the song came from. It was written for Lifehouse, an abandoned project about a future in which people sit at home, connected to a vast entertainment grid, fed music and experiences through a network. The rock opera collapsed under its own complexity, and the songs were salvaged for Who's Next in 1971. The prediction embedded in the discarded story turned out to be uncomfortably accurate about 40 years early. Number 17, Popcorn by Hot Butter. Here's an oddity. One of the first records built entirely from synthesizer sounds to become a genuine worldwide pop hit, and it happened in 1972. The tune was written by Gershon Kingsley, a German-born composer who recorded it in 1969 for an album of Moog experiments. It attracted little attention. Kingsley later put together the first Moog Quartet, an ensemble that performed with synthesizers live at a time when almost nobody did, and they used the piece as an encore. Audiences loved it every night. One member of that group, keyboardist Stan Free, remembered the reaction. re-recorded it with a set of studio musicians under the name Hot Butter, and released it in 1972. It reached number 9 on the Billboard Hot 100, number 5 in Britain, and number 1 in France, Germany, Norway, Switzerland, and Australia, selling over 2 million copies. Nothing on the radio sounded like it. Every bleeping electronic novelty and synth-pop hook of the following decade owes something to that bouncing little melody. Number 16. Papa Was a Rollin' Stone by The Temptations. The Temptations reportedly hated it. Producer Norman Whitfield had already recorded the song with The Undisputed Truth in 1971, and when he brought it back to Motown's flagship vocal group, the version he had in mind was nearly 12 minutes long, with roughly 4 minutes of instrumental music before anybody sings a word. That opening is the whole argument for its place here. A lone bass figure, hi-hat, wah-wah guitar, distant strings and trumpet, patiently building tension in a way pop records simply did not do in 1972. Whitfield was treating a soul single like a film score. Motown released a shortened version, and it went to number 1 on the Hot 100 in December 1972. It also won 3 Grammys, one of them for the instrumental version that filled the B-side. Cinematic soul of this kind soon spread everywhere, and decades later, producers were still cutting up that long, moody intro, looking for something to build on. Number 15. Money by Pink Floyd. Most listeners hearing it on the radio in 1973 never noticed they were tapping their feet to a song written in 7 beats to the bar. The verses of Money run in 7/4 time, then straighten out into ordinary 4/4 for the saxophone and guitar solos before folding back again. A sleight of hand that keeps the groove feeling natural rather than academic. The intro was even more unusual. Roger Waters recorded coins dropping into a mixing bowl, a cash register, ripping paper, and a torn-up receipt, then physically cut the tape into pieces and spliced them into a loop, measuring the lengths by hand so the rhythm would sit in time with the band. The album around it was assembled with the same care, using tape loops, treated voices, and interviews recorded with studio staff and passers-by at Abbey Road, all folded into the music so the seams barely show. The Dark Side of the Moon arrived in March 1973 and never really left, staying on the American album chart for years. Money became Pink Floyd's first American top 20 single, which is a peculiar fate for a track assembled from kitchen noises and an odd time signature. Number 14, Tubular Bells by Mike Oldfield. A 19-year-old walked into a country house studio with an armful of ideas and over months of painstaking overdubbing, played more than 20 instruments himself: guitars, bass, organ, glockenspiel, mandolin, flageolet, and the tubular bells that gave the piece its name. There were no vocals to speak of, no chorus, and no obvious place to break it into songs. It ran roughly 25 minutes per side. Label after label turned it down. It only came out because Richard Branson used it to launch a new company called Virgin Records in May 1973, making it the label's first release. Then something no one planned happened. The director of The Exorcist used the opening minutes in his film that December. American audiences heard that circling piano figure in the dark, and an edited single climbed into the American top 10. The album stayed on the British chart for years and made Virgin, a company that had been a mail-order record business run out of a shop, into a serious label almost overnight. Oldfield's approach, one person, endless overdubs, no rules about song length, became a blueprint for home recording decades before the equipment made it easy. Number 13, Frankenstein by the Edgar Winter Group. In 1971, Edgar Winter wandered into Manny's Music in New York and noticed something about the new ARP2600 synthesizer. Unlike the Moog, its keyboard was separate, joined to the main unit by a cable. He looked at it and thought it seemed light enough to hang from a guitar strap. That small observation made him the first musician to strap a keyboard around his neck and walk the stage with it, the direct ancestor of every keytar that followed. The song itself began as a nameless jam the band used to call the double drum song. Producer Rick Derringer helped hack an unwieldy jam down to size, and the process involved so much cutting and splicing of tape that the control room floor was buried in shiny brown strips. Drummer Chuck Ruff said it was like building Frankenstein's monster, and the name stuck. An instrumental full of synthesizer squeals reached #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 in May 1973. Number 12. Chameleon by Herbie Hancock. Herbie Hancock had a serious reputation as a jazz pianist. Miles Davis's band, a run of respected records, and in 1973 he did something that horrified a good part of that audience. He put together a small band, picked up an ARP synthesizer, and built a 15-minute funk piece around a bass line, played not on a bass but on the keys. That looping electronic figure at the start of Chameleon is one of the most recognizable in modern music, and it was played by hand, without sequencers, on the Headhunters album released in October 1973. Purists accused him of abandoning jazz for the dance floor. Headhunters went on to become the biggest-selling jazz album released up to that point, and an edited version of Chameleon crossed onto the pop chart. The mixture of jazz harmony, deep funk rhythm, and synthesizer bass became one of the most heavily sampled sounds in music, still turning up in hip-hop records made by people born long after 1973. Number 11. Autobahn by Kraftwerk. Four men from Dusseldorf built their own studio, named it Kling Klang, and set about making music with electronics that sounded neither like rock nor like the academic tape experiments that came before it. Autobahn, released in November 1974, ran 22 minutes and 43 seconds, the entire first side of the album, and was designed to feel like a long drive. Their record company cut it down to roughly 3 minutes for a single. Astonishingly, that edit reached number 25 in America and number 11 in Britain, a synthesized German instrumental with a handful of murmured words landing among the year's pop hits. Part of what made it startling was how ordinary the subject matter was. There was no science fiction in it, no space imagery, just the sensation of a car moving along a motorway, with the engine noise, the passing traffic, and the hum of the road recreated on machines rather than recorded. The influence went in every direction at once. David Bowie was so taken with them that he wrote a tribute on his own album. And within a few years, their machine-built rhythms were being borrowed by synth-pop groups, by producers building the earliest hip-hop records, and eventually by the founders of house and techno in Detroit and Chicago. Number 10. Rock Your Baby by George McCrae. The song was never meant for him. Harry Wayne Casey and Richard Finch of KC and the Sunshine Band had a backing track they'd knocked out at a small Florida label in about 45 minutes, and the singer they wanted, Gwen McCrae, was running late. Her husband George happened to be in the building. They asked him to fill in. What makes the record remarkable is what's holding down the beat. Instead of a drummer, Finch used an early Roland rhythm machine, the kind of preset box normally found bolted to a home organ in a cocktail lounge, and simply let it run. Released in May 1974, it went to number 1 in America and Britain and sold enormously around the world. Handing the rhythm to a machine and building a hit on top of it was still close to unthinkable then. Within a few years, it would be the standard way dance records were made. Number 9. The Jungle Line by Joni Mitchell.
Through huts, through Harlem, through jails and gospel.
Joni Mitchell had just come off Court and Spark, the most commercially successful album of her career. Instead of repeating it, she made The Hissing of Summer Lawns in 1975. And its second track sent a good portion of her audience straight to the record shop to complain. The Jungle Line has no band on it. It's built on a looped field recording of the Warrior Drummers of Burundi, taped in Africa years earlier, with Mitchell playing eerie moog lines and acoustic guitar over the top. Widely regarded as one of the earliest commercially released pop recordings to be constructed around a sample of another performance. Reviewers were merciless. The album was treated as a self-indulgent misstep by a writer who should have stuck to confessional folk. 10 years later, the practice of building songs on borrowed rhythms from around the world would be considered visionary, and artists from Prince onward named the album as one of their favorites.
Through huts, through Harlem, through jails and gospel.
Number 8. Bohemian Rhapsody by Queen. Nearly 6 minutes long, no chorus in the ordinary sense, an operatic middle section stuffed with dozens of vocal overdubs, and a hard rock passage bolted onto the end. Every rule of 1975 radio said it was unreleasable. The vocal stacking alone reportedly ran to well over 100 overdubs, layered on analog tape that was played back so many times the oxide began wearing thin. The band later said they could hold the reel up and see light through it. EMI wanted it shortened. Queen refused, and their friend, the broadcaster Kenny Everett, played the full version repeatedly on the radio until demand made the argument for them. They also had a problem getting the band onto television, so they filmed a promotional clip in a few hours for a modest sum. A piece of practical problem solving that helped establish the music video years before MTV existed. The sessions themselves were spread across several studios over weeks, with Freddie Mercury arriving with the structure already mapped out in his head and, according to the band, sections of it written on scraps of paper covered in his own private shorthand. It sat at number 1 in Britain for 9 weeks and has never really gone away since. Number 7. Oxygen, Part 4, by Jean-Michel Jarre. A young French composer made an album in the kitchen of his Paris apartment on an 8-track recorder, a handful of analog synthesizers, and a cheap preset drum box he modified with sticky tape so it would play 2 rhythms at once. The result had no singer, no drummer, and no song titles. Just 6 numbered parts. Record company after record company turned it down. Jarre later said it was treated as an unidentified object arriving in the middle of the punk and disco years, with nobody able to say what shelf it belonged on. A small label finally released it in France in December 1976. British radio played the album in full during its first week, and word spread from there. It reached number 2 on the UK album chart, and Oxygen Part 4 became a hit single in early 1977. Instrumental electronic music built for headphones in living rooms rather than dance floors had just found an audience of millions, essentially by accident. Number 6. Sound and Vision by David Bowie.
Sound and vision.
RCA was horrified by Low. The label had been expecting another soul-flavored record and instead received an album with an entire side of moody instrumentals, reportedly going so far as to suggest Bowie go back and make something more like his previous hit. Working with Brian Eno and producer Tony Visconti in France and Berlin, Bowie built the album around texture rather than performance. The drum sound came from feeding Dennis Davis's kit through an Eventide harmonizer, an early digital device that shifted the pitch as it played. Visconti's description of what it did to time became one of the most repeated lines in studio history. Sound and Vision was released as a single in early 1977 and reached number 3 in Britain, despite the vocal not arriving until the song is more than half over. Cold, spacious, machine-treated, and deliberately unemotional on the surface, it laid out much of the vocabulary that post-punk and new wave bands would use for the next decade.
Sound and vision.
Number 5. Marquee Moon by Television. 10 minutes of interlocking guitars, jazz-derived scales, complicated key changes, and a long, patient solo, recorded by a band from the same New York club scene that produced the Ramones, and released in February 1977, when punk was supposed to mean 3 chords in 2 minutes. Television had spent years playing at CBGB refining it, rehearsing obsessively, so by the time they recorded the album, the arrangement was airtight. Tom Verlaine and Richard Lloyd played guitar lines that answered each other rather than doubling up, which almost nobody in rock was doing at that moment. America mostly shrugged. The album barely registered on the charts there, and radio had no format for a 10-minute track. Britain was another story. A rave review in the NME sent it into the UK Top 30 albums, and the single, split across both sides of a 7-inch because it wouldn't fit on one, reached number 30. Half of post-punk and indie guitar music traces back to those interlocking parts. Number 4. I Feel Love by Donna Summer. The concept behind the album I Remember Yesterday was that each track would evoke a different decade. Giorgio Moroder and Pete Bellotte needed one to represent the future, so they cleared the studio of musicians and built the entire backing track on a Moog modular synthesizer. Every part except a live bass drum, keeping the machines honest. Locking the oscillators into that hypnotic pulse took days of work in Munich, since nothing then could be programmed and left alone. Over it, Donna Summer sang in a light, floating voice that was mixed almost like another instrument. Released in 1977, it went to number 1 in Britain and number 6 in America, which is remarkable for a record with barely any chord movement in it, and a lyric of only a few repeated lines. The story most often told about it involves Brian Eno bursting into a Berlin studio to tell David Bowie he'd heard the sound of the future and that it would dominate clubs for years. He was, if anything, conservative. House, techno, trance, and most of modern dance music starts somewhere near this record. Number 3. Being Boiled by the Human League. 3 young men in Sheffield, 2 computer operators and a hospital porter, bought cheap synthesizers, taught themselves to program them, and in 1978 released a single on a tiny, independent Scottish label with a run of a few thousand copies. There are no guitars on it, no drum kit, and nothing warm about it. The rhythm is stiff and mechanical, the bass line snarls, and the words concern silkworms and the making of silk, delivered in Philip Oakey's flat baritone. It didn't chart. It didn't come close. What it did was circulate among people paying attention. John Peel gave the band a session on national radio, and the record became a cult object for anyone wondering what pop music might sound like if you removed rock instruments entirely. 4 years later, after the Human League had become one of the biggest groups in Britain, that same original recording was reissued and went into the UK Top 10, a record that failed on release and became a hit without changing a note. Number 2. Heart of Glass by Blondie. The band had been kicking the song around since the mid-70s, calling it simply the disco song, and had tried it as a ballad and as reggae without success. When producer Mike Chapman asked what else they had, they offered it up almost apologetically. Keyboardist Jimmy Destry brought in a Roland CR-78 drum machine, an unfashionable box associated with lounge organists, and to get the pattern they wanted, they held down 2 preset buttons at once. Then came the hard part, locking a live drummer and a synthesizer to a machine with no digital synchronization at all. Every beat had to be played in real time, and Clem Burke spent hours on a bass drum pedal to get one usable take. It took roughly a week. Chris Stein later admitted the band thought of it as a novelty, something included on parallel lines mainly to add variety, and were as surprised as anyone when it became the record that made them famous. Released in January 1979, it went to number 1 in America and Britain. Purists from the punk scene accused them of selling out, months before disco records were being blown up in a baseball stadium, and the marriage of machine rhythm and rock band went on to define the 80s. Number 1. Rapper's Delight by the Sugar Hill Gang. By 1979, rapping over records had been happening at parties in the Bronx for years, but nobody had thought to sell it. The DJs themselves largely considered it a live art, something that only made sense in a room with a crowd in it. Sylvia Robinson, a singer and label owner from New Jersey, disagreed. She assembled 3 performers in a matter of days, one of them recruited after she heard him rhyming at the pizzeria where he worked, hired a studio band to play the groove from Chic's Good Times, and had them talk over it for around 15 minutes in essentially one pass. Almost everyone in the record business thought it was a joke. It reached number 36 on the American pop chart, went top 5 on the R&B chart, and sold in the millions worldwide. Chic's Nile Rodgers and Bernard Edwards received songwriting credit after taking the matter up legally. The length caused its own problems. Radio programmers had nothing to do with a 15-minute talking record, so shortened versions were cut, and even those ran far longer than a standard single. Club DJs simply played the long one. An entire industry grew out of one novelty single that nobody in charge believed in. Before you go, 20 records that arrived a little ahead of the room they were played in. If you enjoyed this one, do us a favor. Hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tap the bell so the next one finds you. And tell us in the comments which song you remember hearing for the first time and thinking it sounded like nothing else on the radio, or which one you'd have added to the list.